To me, the MVP is a process. You launch it, you're iterating to actually figure out what the real product should be in the first place. Start building prototypes. Don't use, I don't have the money as an excuse. There's so many tools out there for doing some of the validation work before you get to the coding of a thing.
Hi, welcome to the BeyondProduct podcast, where we explore the value that products create. My name is Moshe Mikanovsky, and I'm your host. Today we have with us Ben Yoskovitz. Ben Yoskovitz is a founding partner at Highline Beta, which is an entrepreneur, investor, and an author of the book Lean Analytics. Highline Beta is a venture studio and VC firm that builds and funds startups from incorporation. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And I should mention you're also in Toronto, like me.
I am.
I have an affinity to invite guests from Toronto for some reason, but
Well, a lot of interesting people maybe in the city.
absolutely. Let's first start with the basics. If you can introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and what are you up to?
Sure, absolutely. So, I'm Ben Yoskovitz, the founding partner of Highline Beta. My background's in the tech space for the last 26, 27 years. I started my first company in 1996. So it sort of tells you how old I am roughly. I was in university at the time at McGill. I've started a couple of companies. I've done, a bunch of sort of a wide variety of things. I've started a couple of startups, have been the VP product at a couple of companies. One was a B2B software company called Go Instant that was acquired by Salesforce. One was a consumer app for buying and selling called Virage Sale. So, I've done B2B, B2C, different industries, different verticals, and then started Highline Beta with my co-founder, Marcus Daniels, 7 years ago. And as you said at the beginning of the show, we're a venture studio. We're building startups from zero, from incorporation, the earliest stages possible, helping founders with the building process, and also investing. And so again, sort of a wide array of things that I've done over time. Most of it focused on product. Even as a CEO, I always was that was the thing I was the most interested and excited about was building software products that helped people and created value.
hmm And it's interesting because a lot of people kind of split the world between entrepreneurs and product managers, as almost there is no overlap between them, but it's actually much closer to each other. Um, at least from my experience, when you're a product manager, you really build a lot of new things that you have to think like an entrepreneur, right?
I think so. I think a lot of the process is quite similar that we would recommend people go through. And if you
hmm
look at the process that we go through with the venture studio in terms of having hypotheses, running experiments, validating or invalidating things, all of that is part of being a product manager as well. And then I think also, of course, if you're a founder or a CEO of a startup, you're thinking about more components of the business perhaps than you
hmm
are if you're focused on product. But still, product without business model doesn't necessarily make any sense. Product without sales and marketing doesn't make any sense. And so, not that you would be working in those areas necessarily, but all of those things are interconnected and they have to be. Otherwise, the product won't work and do the thing that we need it to do. So I think there are quite a lot of similarities there. And I think also you do get a lot of founders who are product people.
Yeah.
Now, again, they're expanding their role beyond that, but they're passionate about building things and building
Right.
stuff.
Right, exactly. So that's probably where the saying that product manager is CEO of the product started from. Do you agree to that saying?
Oh, I try to stay out of these sorts of semantic arguments. I think um, it's a nice way of saying, hey, product managers should have a lot of control over things, but I don't really think product managers are CEOs of the product.
hmm
They are orchestrators of things, and I think that's what CEOs are. They're orchestrators of things. But most product managers don't necessarily have a ton of folks reporting to them,
Hmm.
um, and so it's not quite the same
Yes.
thing. I think
Yeah.
it's a sort of a catchy, simple way of saying, hey, you have a lot of responsibility. You are perhaps the decision maker on certain things, but not even all the things.
Yeah.
Whereas everything bubbles up to the CEO. At the end of the day, they are responsible for everything that's going on, even if they're not making all the decisions, of course.
Yeah.
At the
Yeah.
end of the day, they're 100% responsible for everything. Product managers, not quite the same thing.
Hmm.
And I know some people are, very, very opposed to that sort of idea of product manager, CEO. I think it can, the bad part of it is it can create fiefdoms.
Hmm.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I'm the CEO of this thing, so I control it all and I make all the decisions and I run this part of the business, so nobody else interfere, which is
Yeah.
also a
Yeah.
bad way
Okay.
of being a CEO, by the way. But it gives that mentality of sort of sitting at the top of the hill and
Yeah.
or the mountain, and that's not a great way for product managers to think.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I'm also kind of like started with that mindset and then moved away from that mindset as well. And I think most of the industry, from what I've read, are moving from that mindset as well. But funny thing that you mentioned over there about not managing people. When I moved from engineering and I had my own teams and I was a CTO and developed like a whole team of IT and infrastructure and development. And then I kind of like got tired with that. I said, I want to manage a product because the product doesn't talk back to me. So that was my, but that was many years ago. So actually, I got over that notion as well. So you have really a lot of amazing experience that got you to this point at Highland Beta, and I want to explore a bit more about that experience and how you there, and then we will also dive into what is a venture studio because that's really interesting. But one of the things I mentioned earlier was that you published a book, so you're the co-author of Lean Analytics. Use data to build better startup faster. Let me show it to everyone so you can
There
see
it
the book.
is.
Yes, here it is. And this is actually you wrote it about 10 years ago, right?
Yes, and it was written with Alistair Kroll. Eric Rees was editor, so it was a lean series.
Yes. Here we go.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
right at the top,
Alistair
Alistair.
Kroll. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Hmm.
There was a series of books published by O'Reilly, all as when Eric Rees wrote Lean Startup, and really started to shed light on, hey, there's a different way of doing things, a better way of doing things.
Hmm.
O'Reilly went ahead and started publishing a few different books around lean methodology. There was lean startup in branding, lean startup in other areas of operating a
Right.
business, building a company. And we had the opportunity to write a book more on the data side. So how can we take the sort of theory of lean startup methodology and make it more rigorous through
Hmm.
the lens of analytics?
Okay, yeah, and it does have some framework that you put together over there, but also some great examples and methodologies for different product types. So, like a
Yeah.
SaaS or different companies, a SaaS company building a SaaS product, a marketplace, etc. So, did you go and explore each one of those from your experience, or did you go and how did you get to all of this information and get it into a book?
No, a lot of it is research with others. It's not exclusively from our own experience building different types of businesses, because we haven't built every. Of course, Alistair and I haven't built every type of business, haven't scaled every type of business. So a lot of it is researched through others. A lot of it is coming from case studies that we did. So lots of interviewing of founders, product people, CEOs of bigger companies, startups, and trying to consolidate all of that information into frameworks that we thought would be clear and usable for folks. And so,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
book gets quite, it's a pretty hefty book.
Hmm.
And when you're trying to talk about things in specifics, it starts to just grow and grow and grow, and you sort of boil the ocean a little bit with everything you're trying to cover. So there's things we had to exclude, but then there's things we had to simplify down, and frameworks are a helpful way of doing that because you can't go
Right.
into every detail about everything.
Yeah.
But we learned a ton. I would say writing the book. Probably
Hmm.
learned more from writing the book than we put into the book. So I think that that's an interesting part of the exercise of trying to write a book in the first place is just everything you have to gather from an information perspective and everything that you have an opportunity to learn.
Hmm. And I know from writing my own book, but mine is fiction, so it's quite different.
Okay, yeah,
That
that's different.
Yeah, yeah, very different. You still need to do research. You still need to learn a lot throughout the process. But I try to treat it as a product as much as I could,
Hmm.
especially with fiction, because fiction is like art. When you paint a painting, or when you write a song, or well, I never wrote songs, so I don't know, but I do paint as well, and you're very attached to it, so you want it to be really amazing, and you can't let go of it, and you want everyone to love it. But the fact is that not everyone is going to love it, and you will have to find your niche market. So I try to detach myself from it and treat it as a product. So
Right.
to find out who are going to be the users, and then what is the value that I'm going to create for them. But I also noticed just the number of prints that you had, and I'm sure that, and I think that it was also translated to many languages. 2019, it shows 22nd release. So I don't know since then how many releases. What have you seen throughout the years? The value that book as a product, the value that it created to people that read it.
Right. And yeah, we thought about it as a product as well. And so, in fact, we were applying some of the lean principles into writing the book. We tested content before we put it into the book. We started publishing it ourselves first.
Mm,
We had of course, a wait list. Writing the book took about a year, and so we had that amount of time to build up a wait list, build up momentum, build up interest in the book, so that when you release it, you can drive early sales quickly, and that's really what drives a lot of momentum in book sales. It's a little bit more like a consumer application,
mm,
where if
right.
if a consumer application benefits from more people using it, you better get more people using it quickly and then see if it goes from there. And so we applied a lot of the techniques, the methodologies around lean principles into writing the book. Um, and then it's been an amazing experience. I mean, the book is 10 years old now. It has been published in 9 languages. People are still
Wow.
buying it today, which is
Mhm.
super cool and amazing. Of course, like most books, maybe all books, in fact, they get a spike at the very beginning because you've built up momentum and you put sort of considerable effort into the marketing of the book early on, but they tend to die off very quickly.
Tell me
Uh,
about it.
yeah, it goes up. Yeah, it goes up. You get a lot of sales, let's say. It goes down, and then it trickles down. Of course, we have the same phenomenon. If you looked at the graph of our sales, it would be the same thing. Now, ours have stayed sort of consistent over many, many years, which is great, pretty surprising. The case studies in the book, of course, are all 10 years old. The lessons from them relevant. Many of the companies we talk about don't exist anymore, even. Of course, there's been just so much change.
Right.
But I think the fundamental principles of the book still hold true. And I think
Mhm.
that's what's given it some of its longevity is people can pick up the book today, look at it and say, I understand lean startup or design thinking or some of these other methodologies in theory. Can somebody give me a bit of a playbook for how to get into the weeds on things? Oh,
Yes.
okay. There's a couple of frameworks in there that are usable.
Yes.
Now, another good example is we tried to put benchmarks in the book. So, if you're going to track certain numbers, what might be a good metric or a bad metric? What would be a good value for this or a bad value? That's changed over time. Of
Yeah.
course, what's a good level of churn versus a bad level of churn, and people's viewpoints on it, more research on it might change those types of numbers. So things like benchmarks maybe don't survive that well, but the core principles of how to think about building a product, taking it to market, measuring the value that it's creating, those things actually stay true the whole time. And so you can still extract that kind of value out of it. And I think that's why people are still buying the book and using the book, which is amazing.
Absolutely. So it does create a lot of value, and the numbers just they don't lie. So that's the beauty about data and analytics, that they don't lie. Perfect. So let's move on now to Highline Beta and Venture Studio, because I'm really curious about that. I've been following you for many years, and when I first saw what you're doing with Highline Beta, I thought, and maybe you pivoted since then, or maybe you still do the same thing, but I thought that the main thing back then was helping establish enterprises find innovation within the enterprise to create new products or to create new line of products or services. Is that still part of what Highland Beta is doing, or did you pivot it completely into startup ecosystem?
No, we're still doing that. When we started the company, we had a thesis or a hypothesis around how could we help big companies do innovation better, faster, outside of their core business. So, not thinking so much about their core innovation or, let's say, incremental innovation that big companies are always doing. We were thinking more about new businesses, new services, new ventures that big companies could build that would strengthen their core but be further away from their core business. Where you would be able to do more experimentation, work a little bit faster, maybe try new business models, layer value on top of their core business. So we had a thesis around helping big companies do that, which would then lead to spinning new startups out. So
Mm-hmm.
you would do the work with a corporate partner, you would find these opportunities, you would validate them, you would test them in market, and then potentially make the decision to create a new startup.
Mm-hmm.
Take the learnings and the knowledge that you gained working with the corporate, bring a founder in, put that knowledge into the startup, put capital into the startup, and then that startup would be able to move very quickly because they would have their first customer or their first partner. They would have a lot of the validation or some of the validation done already, and they
Right.
could more quickly move to build an MVP, get to market, and go from there. So that was sort of the core thesis we had. Today, we still do that, and we still
Mm-hmm.
work with corporates around their growth innovation mandates.
Mm-hmm.
But spinning companies out is hard. It's just there's a lot of complexity there. So
Mm-hmm.
we're less inclined to focus on spinning companies out in our venture studio model and more focused on just working with founders who have
Mm-hmm.
ideas typically before they've incorporated their businesses, and helping them go through the exercise of validating the problem and the solution, building the MVP, going to market, raising capital, and then
Mm-hmm.
ideally connecting those startups into our corporate partners.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of one model as being top down, work with a corporate partner, validate something, spin out a startup.
Mm-hmm.
Again, most of the time, corporates end up building those ventures in house or finding existing startups to partner with or acquire, which we can help them with. That would be
Mm-hmm.
more the top down model. The bottom up model would be work with a founder on an idea in an area
Mm-hmm.
that, I always say we're a little dangerous in. We know
Mm.
something because we've done some work. We know some
Right.
executives that we can connect to. We know how to speed up the validation process because we've got industry
Mm-hmm.
experts that we can call on and then build the startup bottom up. So similar model and thesis, but
Mm.
evolved from when we started 7 years ago.
And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when we see what works and what not, we pivot, and that's just a great example of that. But it does seems like the original thesis is still there, and there is still value in helping enterprises. So I want to learn a bit more about venture studio, because I know what venture capitals do. Um, I think I know what accelerators are doing. What does Venture Studio does, and where do they sit in that ecosystem?
Sure. And I will say that there's many versions or flavors of venture
Okay,
studios.
I guess
So
like anything else.
like anything else, everybody's
Yeah,
definition's a little bit different.
right.
Uh, the venture studio model or the term venture studio has been gaining popularity. As a result, you'll see more and more companies calling themselves venture studios or building venture
Hmm.
studios, all of which might be venture studios in certain people's viewpoints, might not. So it's a little bit
Hmm.
muddy or very muddy. For
Right.
me, a venture studio has to be building and funding startups from
Hmm.
zero, from the earliest days. So if the
Hmm.
startup's incorporated and it's got a founder or a founding team and it's building a product, and you're investing in that, you're an investor.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's what angel investors do. It's what the venture capitalists do. That's fine. There's a business there. If you're building companies, helping founders with product building, software development, go to market, those things, but you're not investing, then you're a agency, a development shop, a
Right.
design shop, a UI UX shop, whatever services you're providing, but you're providing services and most likely getting paid in return for those services in
Right.
dollars and sometimes in a little bit of equity.
Yeah.
And when you combine those two things together, the building and the funding from that very, very early stage, that's how I would define venture studio.
I
Uh,
see.
Now, I will say, some venture studios will ideate internally, and they'll say,
Hmm.
okay, we as a group will come up with these ideas. We as a group will do all the validation work or a lot of it on our own first. Then we'll decide there's a company to be built. Then we'll recruit a founder into the company, and then we'll spin it out. Um,
Uh-huh.
Now some venture studios ideate and validate differently. In our case, we sometimes do that,
Hmm.
come up with something on our own that we're interested in, do our own validation, then recruit a founder. But again, we also find, ideas through our corporate partners, or we're bringing founders in who already have ideas and working with them. So we're agnostic, maybe,
Hmm.
is a way of thinking about it in terms of where the opportunities come from. Where some venture studios will have a very precise methodology for that.
Hmm. Hmm. And because you also build it, so I guess there is more stakes into it for the venture studio.
There
So.
is, yes. So from an
Mhm.
equity perspective, venture
Mhm.
studios will take more equity than investors would at that stage because of the
Work
help
done.
that the hands-on work that they're doing. So the way to think about the equity is venture studios will take a portion of the equity for the sweat.
Hmm.
Here's they might not divide it this way, but it's the way to think about it. We're going to provide X amount of help. In exchange for that help, we're going to take Y amount of equity. We're also going to put this amount of capital in, and we're going to take some portion of equity for that. It can range quite a lot. And so you will see a lot of venture studios are in the 40 to 50% range, which in my opinion is high, uh,
Hmm.
out of the gate. Highlight beta is considerably less than that. We're typically in the, call it, 15 to 20% range. Uh,
Interesting. Hmm.
and part of that for us is these startups have to be fundable by other investors after. And when the cap tables got 50% of it already, very early on in that first, 6 months, let's say, 50% is already taken up by somebody else.
Hmm.
The future investors often don't love that cap table structure. And so we've tried to create a model that we think will be more friendly to investors downstream.
I see. Do you focus on a specific vertical or verticals and specific interests? Or do you just like if the idea seems great and it's been validated, you will say, okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, we're not vertical focused or industry specific. We tend to do things in areas where we have already done work and we're working with corporate partners. So, as an example, we've done quite a bit in the insurance space.
Mm.
Financial services would be another space. And so, one of our most recent startups, well, actually, the most recent one that we announced is called Flora, which
Hmm.
is going to provide fertility insurance direct to consumer.
Oh wow. Hmm.
Two great founders. They were already working on this idea, but saw the benefit of working with a studio like Highline Beta to help them make it happen.
Right.
We've done a lot of work in the insurance space, not specifically in that vertical, but we felt like we could connect a lot of dots. And that's, to
Mhm.
me, at a sort of esoteric way of describing what a venture studio does, it's
Mhm.
connecting dots. And so, we're open to different industries and verticals. There might be certain things we won't go into, like
Mhm.
we won't do games as an example.
Mm.
I'm trying to, although Flora is in the consumer space,
Right.
doing sort of consumer social apps as an example wouldn't be our forte. B2B SaaS businesses in certain verticals, probably more our sweet spot for in certain areas that we've done
Mhm.
work in. So, but we're open. We like to just meet people, learn what they care about, learn what they're focused on. And then again, sometimes we'll bring certain things to the table where we're starting to form our own thesis where we
Right.
believe there are opportunities.
Right. So, what is the process? And this process you can describe from Highline Beta specific or from any type of, someone has an idea and they want to go through the validation of that idea and start in something, right? What would be the process that you go through? And to talk about the entire process will take us not just one episode, will take us probably a whole series, a whole season. But we can do it in very in highlights. Take
Sure. Yeah,
take us
absolutely.
through the Highline.
For me, the process, again, the highlights are the same whether you're building a startup on your own, whether you're going through a venture studio, whether, frankly, it's a corporate working on an innovation project. It
Hmm.
always starts with the early discovery and validation of the problem.
Right.
Who has the problem? How severe is the problem? How much confidence or conviction do we have that that problem is real and that people are actually looking for a new solution for that problem? So to me, you think of that as let's first validate the problem.
Hmm.
Then often what we're doing is validating the solution, but without building a product. So now we're into the world of concept testing, prototyping, solution interviews. So
Hmm.
you call all of this doing research, mostly primary research. So you're doing, not just Googling stuff to get, statistics on an industry, which you can do as well, but doesn't help with the sort of, gritty validation that has to happen.
Right.
So problem validation, solution validation before you build the product. And that for me is about the point in time. If you've got enough conviction in the studio model, you would incorporate the company. So you haven't built the MVP yet, but you say, look, we know there's a real problem. We think we have an idea of what the solution needs to be. And
Hmm.
we have in early signals that people are willing to use what we'll build and ideally pay for it if in a
Hmm.
B2B context.
Hmm.
Now we can incorporate the company, build that first version. You've already got that list of potentially early adopters that you're working with through that MVP phase. But that's really the beginning part, interviewing users, learning about their problems. And you'll never get enough data at that stage to definitively say, yeah, 100% this is going to work. So you're using, let's call it data, some quant data, but also qualitative data, and frankly, your own conviction that there's a real opportunity. By the way, that's also, I would say that's the same way you should build product. So
Absolutely. I mean,
it's the same methodology.
yeah. So you basically describe the product management methodology.
Yes, 100%. It's the same process with the added components around more perhaps around business model, more perhaps around okay, do we have a competitive advantage here? Because if you're building up a product feature, let's say, some of those components of it have hopefully already been established.
Right.
Whereas here, market size might matter as opposed to if you're a product manager building features, well, market size doesn't necessarily impact what you're actually building. But the validation of should we do this thing is
Hmm.
basically the same process for building a business as it is building a product, as it is building features.
Yes, yes. And I love it that you said that it's never 100%. You never really know. With all the data that you collect, you still have to use a bit of your intuition, but then you also have to test it and without testing it, you will never really know. And even after you test it, you could get some mixed responses,
A
etc.
100%. I mean, this is where, by the way, I think corporates, because of how the speed with which they operate, which is not super fast usually, they tend to over research, overanalyze. I would suggest some venture studios do that as well. They will spend 9 months, doing research without building and shipping something and putting it into people's hands. At the end of the day, all the research in the world is just to point you in a direction. The only
Yes.
way you really know is when you finally build something and put it in people's hands, and now you're reacting and iterating from there. And
Yeah.
so for us, we're trying to get through that early process within, it depends how much work the founder's already done, perhaps, but a
Hmm.
couple of months.
Yeah.
If in a couple of months you haven't built up enough conviction that something is worth chasing, you should
Hmm.
probably, it might still be a good idea. I don't know, but we didn't find it fast enough. And there's
Hmm.
an opportunity cost there, which is, okay, look, we could spend the next year going down this rabbit hole. We should probably go chase something else because we're in the business of building and funding companies, not
Yes.
doing research.
Not research, exactly. And if you define, or if you would have to define what's the real value that you create over there, what would that be?
For the venture studio, you mean?
For the venture studio and for the founders?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I think for us, it's often founders don't have the level of rigor necessary to do that validation work. They have a sense of how to do it. They've read something about jobs to be done, or they've read something about lean startup. For us, this is what we do all the time, all day.
Right.
And so being able to apply more rigor to that process, being able to provide external feedback, founders do have a tendency to fall in love with the things that they're doing.
Yes.
Arguably, to your point earlier, product people do as well. We can fall in love with things pretty quickly, but we can also fall out of love pretty quickly. Each one of these, businesses we build is important to us, but we have a portfolio, and
Yeah.
so now we're providing, more of that external lens, but we're also doing the work. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's an important balance. And then once we've incorporated the company, of course, we're putting capital in. Oftentimes, there's nobody else willing to invest at that stage, really. But then we're also going to help build the MVP. We're also going to help bring it to market. We're also going to help them recruit a team. It's often a solo founder, but not always. So,
Hmm.
all the other things you would need to get from 0 to 1, we're actually going to help them do, because we're going to
Right.
do a good portion of that work with them. And we think of ourselves as co founders.
Yes. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned the MVP because that's one of those things that lately I'm starting seeing people talking about. Just don't worry about the MVP, just do other things, or call it something else, or people that just they don't even know what MVP is, or they define something as an MVP where it's not the original intention. But it does happen a lot in the industry. The same thing with the Agile or Scrum. Most people that are practicing those don't really know what they are. So,
Right.
what's your perspective of an MVP? And I'm sure you've done a lot of these throughout your career and also at Highline Beta.
Yes. I mean, so MVP is one of those things that has been defined and redefined so many times that I don't think anybody knows anymore what an MVP actually is. So it stands for minimum viable product. Now, early on, when Lean Startup was just coming out, folks would say, "Oh, a landing page is an MVP," which
Okay.
is not true. A
Hmm.
landing page is a great prototype. It's a great experiment to run. Can I get people to show up to the landing page and sign up for something? Can I test a value proposition? Of course, you should absolutely use landing pages for that. But it's not a minimum viable product. It's definitely minimal. It's arguable if it's an actual product, but it's not viable. And that's the thing that most people have bastardized now on MVP, is the
Mhm.
is the viable part. And so for me, an MVP is a minimum product that creates value for the user, that actually solves the problem that before you build it, you would have validated. And that's the part that people have either lost. So they either think it's, I put a tweet out. I don't know if we can call them tweets anymore, but I put a tweet out and got feedback.
I
That's
X'd
my
it.
yeah. I asked it. I'm not saying that. That's brutal. Um, that's an MVP. That's not an MVP. I built a landing page. I built a clickable prototype. Fantastic. I love clickable prototypes. That's not an MVP because it's not solving the problem, and you can't measure the value that you're creating out of it. And then other people will look at an MVP and say, well, now it has to be bigger. If it can't be these small, lightweight things, I got to build the full blown product. So now I'm adding all these features and all these features and all these features to it before I launch it. That's also not an MVP.
It's
So I
not
think
minimal.
it's not, yeah, it's not minimum. So to me, I think I I don't have a problem with the terminology, but I also have strong conviction of what I think an MVP is. It's just if you Google what is an MVP, you're going to get 100 answers, and as a result, now nobody knows what the hell it is, and so the term has lost its power. So
Yeah.
people have come up with alternatives to it to try to re-articulate what it meant in the first place.
Hmm.
Minimal lovable product. So they've
Mm.
switched, viable, because viable is nebulous, perhaps, to lovable.
Hmm.
A landing page can't be, I mean, I suppose you could love a landing page, but people have tried to redefine it in other ways to re-emphasize the point that it's supposed to be an actual product that creates value. I don't think that that's that complicated to understand, but a lot of
Yeah.
people feel that way.
I think that what people are trying to do is they're trying to get to a product market fit, and then they're saying, "Oh, it's lovable, therefore there is a fit there with a segment of people that are actually going to love it." And
Right.
before it happens, we should never call it anything or whatever. But they have to release many versions before they get to that. It's not a magic that the first version everyone will fall in love with and start using it.
Right.
There is still value in defining a true MVP, and then getting the feedback, and with trying it out, and with getting collecting the data, etc., seeing really does that work or not, do I create the value or not, etc.
Right. Yeah.
Now.
Look,
Mhm.
again, like just on this topic, to me, it's one of those things that I think a lot of look, if you can't articulate what an MVP is to your startup team, I think in corporates it gets very confusing, and I understand that because they never release MVPs. Like it's arguably insane for them to do it. It gets
Yeah.
very scary, and so there, I think the definition gets so watered down. But to me, if you validated a problem and you think you know what the solution is, you build the smallest version of that solution, you put it in people's hands, and it either solves the problem or doesn't. Now, how do you figure that out? You collect data on things like usage, and you ask them, did it solve the problem? And you talk to them about the value that it's creating or not creating. And if you got it wrong, you iterate and iterate and iterate until you've actually solved the problem with the smallest feature set that you need. Now,
Yes.
will you know the exact feature set at the beginning? You won't. But anything that doesn't involve you putting the thing into people's hands that they can use, in my opinion, is not an MVP.
Hmm. Yeah. Perfect. So one of the things that I've seen, startup founders struggle with, and I actually have the same problem myself because I had ideas, I still have ideas for some startups, but I don't have the capital to go there and actually spend in creating an MVP for that. And maybe 20 years ago, when I was still a developer, I could have done it. But now I don't even remember how to develop. I've been too many years at product management. So, how do you face that? The chicken and the egg. Like, how do I create an MVP if I don't have the capital to do it? Or what might be, and it's very hard to answer. Like, give a number or a range to say this is a range that will cost you to create an MVP because every product is different and we can't really compare apples to apples.
Yeah, it's that one's tough. I think the option there is to try to build up more and more conviction without having to actually build something. So again, this would be prototypes, be they clickable or otherwise. A lot of that can be done so scrappily. Anybody can build a landing page. If you can't build a landing page, you should not be starting a company. If you can't, frankly, if you can't build a clickable prototype, because you can actually do it in PowerPoint, which a lot of non-technical business founders love PowerPoint. So fantastic. Google Slides. So there's so many tools out there for doing some of the validation work before you get to the coding of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So start there. Don't use I don't have the money as an excuse. Start building prototypes. They're fake. I get it. They're not going to be actual MVPs, but start doing that to prove value.
Yeah.
When it comes to building the MVP, again, to your point, like they vary wildly. You are seeing more and more no code tools emerging, and I think that those are, if you're willing to get the dirt under your fingernails and figure out how to use those tools, you can use those sorts of things. Like, you don't need to know how to build a database. You can use Airtable.
Mm-hmm.
So you can start to string things together, with the existing tools that are out there or no code tools. So I think that's the next sort of step. Now, are you going to be able to build a complete native, iOS app on your own that's beautiful? Probably not. But can you get
Mm-hmm.
it to a stage potentially where you could put it into some friendly hands and get feedback? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yeah.
me, an MVP, again, cost wise, of course, yeah, it varies all over the place. But I get pretty twitchy if we're spending more than about 50K. And arguably, I would love that to be less, of course. So it's not like 50K is the magic budget, but anything over 50K to me is like, I don't know if we really need to be spending this kind of money. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you can offshore dev, which of course is less expensive than it might be here. You can try to recruit somebody to help you build it. If you're a non-technical founder, you'll often hear, people say, "Hey, look, if you can't even convince one other person to jump off the cliff with you, maybe you don't have what it takes to be a founder." I don't think that that's an unreasonable statement. So you've
Mm-hmm.
got an idea, you've done some validation work, you've shown that you are willing to get your hands dirty building prototypes or what have you. Start going to meetups, start meeting developers, try to convince somebody to help you build it for free. So yeah, you've got to be very scrappy through that process.
Yeah.
Uh, and then at some point you're going to have to put money behind it. Uh, you know, it's tough for early investors, by the way. So angel investors, even venture studios like Highline Beta, we're not banks, right? So you
Yeah.
you can't just keep coming to us more money, more money, more money. And the truth is, if you have conviction, you'll find 10K, you'll find 15K. Not
Mm-hmm.
100K, not 200K. Like, I get it, but you'll find 10K and say, I'm willing to take 10K of my money, which is not an insignificant amount for me as
Right.
a solo founder. I need you to put in much more than that, but that's a strong signal. So you're going to have to, at some point, put a couple of bucks in. Can you do a bunch of work before? Yeah, I would do that first.
Mm-hmm. That's a great, lots of great tips over there for founders and how to work with someone like Highline Beta. How did you get to that 50K number? Is that like from experience or just level of risk?
Yeah, it's just from experience of, what's it going to, so for me, I think any MVP that takes more than 3 months is also for me just a benchmark. It's too long. It's now, there are complicated things to build that of course will take much longer than that. So these are all rules made to be broken. If you're in deep tech, if you're in hardware, yeah, 3 months is short. If you have to do 5 years of research, yeah, that's a different ball game. But in the software business,
Hmm.
or 3 months is a long time. And if you say, look, I'm never going to have this launch, it's going to take me 9 months to launch this thing, man, the level of risk you're taking there is really, really high. So if something's going to take that long, okay, maybe it will. Maybe that's true. Maybe you can't shorten it and launch it earlier than that. But then you
Hmm.
better be able to validate other things along the way. Because if you
Mm.
disappear for 9 months, go build this thing, and then release it to the world, there's a very good chance you're wrong, no matter what. And now you've spent 9 months. So I'm always thinking about the opportunity cost and the risks. And if your cycle is 9 months, forget it. You're never going to get there. So for me, it's like 3 months, sub 50K. What can I get out there? Now, if the argument is I can't do anything for that and have it be valuable, and if you really believe that's true and you've done the validation and you've got evidence around that, yeah, maybe it is more expensive and maybe it does take longer. But I would always challenge that because people's first instinct is, well, my product is the most complicated and the most important in the world. Therefore, it's going to cost $1 million to build and take 3 years. Like,
Yeah.
well, okay, let's
Hmm.
challenge that and just ask over and over again, why?
Right.
Just
Right.
like either they're making it all up and it's complete nonsense, or they
Hmm.
realize, it turns out I don't really need all these things. I don't need all these things. I don't need all
Yeah.
these things. And then you've
Yeah.
pared it down to something that you feel confident is still an MVP, still viable, but much smaller.
Right. And that sometimes could be a tricky thing to do because that value to to the users, we usually start with a very concise idea, like this is the vision, this is what we're trying to solve. Let's say we validate it, yes, that's what it is. But then we expand to all of those ideas how we can solve it, and then we're like, okay, so now to solve this one thing, we have to do all of these, which is probably wrong. We scope it down, and then sometimes we scope it so down that we forget about the original value. So we
Right.
still have to have that relationship of what is the initial vision, and don't forget about that, right?
Yes, I totally agree with that. And again, sometimes you can pare things down because of budget, just the realities of the capital that you have available, where you pare it down so much that it no longer is valuable. So I don't disagree with that at all. This is why I
Mm.
think trying to test some of this in advance and showing people things and learning what really matters to them in terms of the priority of the things that you might build. You can sell the vision and you have to stay true to what your vision is, but you can also sell the roadmap. Look, I can't build everything for you today, but if I built this thing, is that enough that you're going to use it and maybe pay for it and get value, and then I'm going to follow very quickly with this other thing and this other thing
Right.
and this other
Right.
thing. So
Right.
not everything has to get built at launch, right? For
Yes.
me, that's also why I think one area where people have sort of ruined MVPs is you launch it and it just works. And to me, the MVP is a process. You
Mm.
launch it, you're iterating to actually figure out what the real product should be in the first place.
So how do you know it actually works? You launch the MVP, and then what?
Yeah, yeah, great question. That's the question. So for me, as soon as you've launched something, you can start tracking quantitative data. So you have to, before you launch it, you have to decide how you think people will use the product. So what does that mean? That means how frequently do you think they're going to use it? Is it a daily use app? If you're building a new calendar tool for people, it has to be daily use because we live in our calendars all the time.
Hmm.
If you're building tax planning software, it's probably not something people use every single day of their lives. So, first, you have to understand what's the frequency of usage that I believe people need to have in order to prove to me they're getting value. If you're
Hmm.
building a calendaring tool and people use it every single day, it's not unreasonable to assume that they're getting value out of it because the alternative would be they would just go back to their old calendaring tool.
Right.
So first, you've got to get a sense of how would I define a good user? A good user uses the product once a week. a good user does ABC, a good user puts this amount of data in it, and you should have a baseline definition of what that looks like, because that's how you would then go and quantitatively measure if people are behaving the way you thought they would behave. If they
Mhm.
are, that's a good sign. If they're not, that's usually a bad sign, unless unless your hypothesis around the usage patterns was wrong. So, but to me, it's the collecting that usage data, and it's what we described in lean analytics as stickiness. Is the
Mhm.
product sticky? But sticky will mean different things for different products. And then you also have to be collecting qualitative data. So you have to be talking to the users, understanding how they're using it, asking them if they are getting value from it, figuring out if they will keep using it. There's other qualitative or quantitative signals. Do they share it with other people? If it's a social application that
Mhm.
requires increases in value as more people use it, do they refer anybody to it? If it's a
Mhm.
B2B product that increases in value, if they invite, let's say you're building a tool for salespeople and you're targeting companies that have multiple salespeople, and you figure out how to get it into the hands of one salesperson. Does that salesperson share it with another salesperson? So that's a quantitative thing, but also a qualitative signal. Oh, they're sharing it with people. So to me, it's proving stickiness and then qualitatively learning from those users if they are in fact getting value, if it is in fact solving the problem that you had previously validated.
hmm So I can't tell you how many products I worked in the past that did not have any way to measure those analytics. And some of them were in the days that we didn't even think about analytics, or we didn't have the tools like these days that you can just integrate with them and start collecting the data. So these
Right.
days it's so much easier. But even today, I've seen MVPs or people cutting out, the analytics part from their MVP, so because they are like, oh, that doesn't create any value to the users. Where what they're losing over there is the immediate, first of all, exactly what you said, the ability to actually measure those things, how people are going to use it, and you really need it from day one. Do you agree to that?
Yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah, you have to instrument the product, which means instrumenting it means just tracking the things that are going on inside the product. You have to have some way of knowing if people are even using it and how they're using it, and ideally you're measuring that quantitatively. And it's not that complicated to just get the basics done.
Hmm.
Integrate third party system into that, put that in there, drop the code in, track what's going on, figure out frequency of use, what they're doing, where they're spending their time, but make sure you also have tried to define that before. So, another example is let's use calendaring, just because I'm staring at my calendar. So you're building a new calendaring app. You're tracking things, and you're tracking how long they spend in the calendar. And you're like, oh, they spend 30 minutes a day in the calendar. I don't know that that would be a good thing, because the truth is, again, hypothesis, we want our calendars to work for us. We don't want to have to spend all day futzing
Yes.
around.
Yes.
So you got to also track the right thing that you could say, I think this metric equates to value. You know,
Yes.
time on site is a great metric if you're building a consumer application or a media business, because your business model is going to be dependent on things like ads. And the
Yes.
only way to generate money on ads is have a lot of people paying
Right.
attention.
Right.
A productivity app, I don't want you in that app all the time. I want you doing the thing that I was supposed to
You need to be
be.
productive. Exactly.
Exactly. So knowing the metric that drives the value, and the
Hmm.
value is about usage, but usage is also driving business model.
Hmm.
So this is where product people also have to think about, am I driving some higher level metric? Oh, look at that. I increased frequency of usage by 10%.
Hmm.
Fantastic. Are we selling any more licenses as a result? Or did we just get people spending more time in the app? So
Yes.
those dots have to connect up from what I'm building to usage metrics around stickiness to, am I driving value higher up around business model?
Yeah. So it does goes back to analytics, and Just
That's
do you force or make all of your founders to read the book before they
no,
start working with you?
I don't even force them to buy the book.
No, you can give. I would give them for free as a gift, but I'm just saying, like, if you want to work with me, like putting myself in your shoes, you have to understand this.
I don't do that. But you're right. Like it just goes back to some of those fundamental principles. That's why I think the book still holds value,
Yeah,
and the principles around lean methodology and some of the also still hold value. So we can argue MVP all we want,
yeah,
debate it, call it different things, like mad about it. At the end of the day, if you're not solving a problem for people and you can't measure it, you're not going to be able to build the business. It's
yeah,
just as
yeah,
simple as that. So call it what you want, break it down how you want. But yeah, lean analytics works if you think about it in a methodical way,
yeah.
and you say step one gets me to step two, gets me to step three. The steps can sometimes be fuzzy. Sometimes I go in the wrong direction. It's never perfect and it's never easy, but
Hmm.
some framework and guidance makes sense. So a lot of the I don't force people to buy or read the book, but I'm constantly repeating similar messages around how to think about
Absolutely,
these things.
absolutely, absolutely. What are you working on these days? Any interesting things you want to share with us?
Well, I mean, I think my side project, if you will, is the my newsletter, which I just started in December of last year of 2022, I guess, I'm enjoying that because for a while I wasn't doing a lot of writing, and I decided, okay, I wanted to start writing again. I enjoy doing it. It helps me connect with more people and grow my network, which is my selfish reason perhaps for
Hmm.
doing it.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's been effective. So the newsletter is fun. I publish once a week. It's called Focused Chaos, focusedchaos.co. So that's fun. I'm covering a few topics, product management, of course, um, just building startups in general, fundraising part of it because I'm more on that side now, so I can share more of what it's like being on the other side of the table, maybe as a VC, and then also talking about venture studios and the different ways that companies can get built, because I don't think that there's just one way startups can be built. So
Right.
that to me remains fun. I really do enjoy the writing, sharing it. Certainly getting feedback from people is cool, but I'm going to keep doing that and keep writing and keep growing that,
Yeah.
growing the newsletter as much as I can. I haven't been able to write about, so on the topic of MVPs, I've tried to write that post multiple times and I have yet to do it because I know people are just, I'm going to say MVP is the greatest term ever, and people are going to lose their minds. And I don't mind being controversial. I don't have
Yeah,
a
that's what create some
so
discussions, right?
I know. So I'm probably still going to do it, and then everybody's going to be like, "No, MVP is a stupid term. You can't use it anymore. It's broken." And I'm going to be like, "You're just using it wrong." And then we'll get into a circular argument about it that will go nowhere. But I've tried to write that multiple times, so maybe I will at some point write that post. I do try to make them practical as I can. Building tools like, I did one about business models, and I tried to build sample business models in a Google sheet that people could just use, or one about how to do investor updates.
Hmm.
That's something that founders screw up all the time. And I'm like, well, let me just give you a template that I've seen work that has resonated with me. And I shared that. So I try to make it as practical as I can. And it's fun. It's just fun. It's fun to write.
Hmm. Perfect, perfect. Yeah, if you need help there, I'm willing to help you with that because I think we're sharing a similar opinion about MVP.
Right. Okay. When I write it, and everybody, and I post it on Twitter because I'm not saying the other name.
Hmm.
Uh, and everybody jumps in and is like, no, it's a stupid term. How dare you? You don't know what you're talking about. Then I'll wait for you, and I'll be like, well, Moshe agrees, so we're good. We're good.
Very nice. One question I like to ask is about the future. How do you see technology changing us and changing the future, changing how maybe startups will be working or your specific business?
Yeah, look, I think we were talking earlier about how do we get to MVP without dollars. I think that's still honestly getting easier and easier for folks, and some of it is the tools around AI that are emerging, which I think have created more use cases, are allowing non-technical people to at least build basic things, not great things, not scalable things, but basic things and test concepts. So I think that's going to continue and that's going to be interesting. I would like to see people building companies in areas that are less sexy. I think that swings every once in a while. So, not AI, like use AI, that's fine. But a lot of folks go after problems, that they understand or they know. And I'm looking at things maybe outside of that. So, like a good example would be elder care.
Hmm.
And that's an area that I got interested in last year. Started doing a deep dive on it, trying to understand what are the problems, but not superficially understand the problems, but try to dig deeper. Actually,
Hmm.
through the venture studio, we built some concepts, we put them in the market, not MVPs, tested things, learned a ton, met a ton of people. Haven't found the business to build in that space, but that's an example of something where like there's a real problem. Like we're all getting older and we're not making as many children as we used to.
Hmm.
Now, if you're 20 years old and you're thinking about Y Combinator, or you're thinking you can conquer the universe and you don't have experience in that space, you're probably pointed at something else, like using AI to do something cool, like make pitch decks or something. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it, but I'd love to figure out where we're going to house old people, as an example, So as I get older and I think about Highline Beta and I just think about startups in general, to me, the purpose part of it becomes more and more important. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably true for a lot of folks as they get older, they've tried a bunch of stuff. And so that's an area for me where I'm like, if we don't solve that as a problem, or use housing in general as a problem, like
Hmm.
that's where's everybody going to live? I don't know. How's everybody going to afford somewhere to live? So these are much bigger problems than I can solve, certainly by myself or even
Hmm.
ever. But generally, future for me would be more companies focused on, call it, more serious problems and not incremental improvements to an existing thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
That that's what I want to focus on. That's what I like
Yeah.
Highlight Beta to focus on. That's what I would like to see more founders focus on.
What I'm taking from that is that it's not that technology will drive us, but we will drive technology based on the real problems that we need to solve.
Yeah, look, technology is amazing, and when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, like that changed the world. It
Hmm.
really did. You can't dismiss the impact that technology has when we make leaps and bounds.
Hmm.
Now the question is whether we can apply it in any meaningful way that's really going to create huge value,
Hmm.
uh, and not wait around for technology to make the next leap for us to go solve real problems,
Yeah.
but go find the real problems and then figure out what technology we can use. Being tech first is usually a mistake. Getting enamored with the technology because of the technology and then trying to point it at something usually doesn't work out very well.
Right. Right. Well, with that message, and I think it's a very important message for everyone, I want to ask you a question we ask all of our guests. What is like one product that you would like to give shout out to?
What's one product that I would give a shout out to? Well, yeah. I'm going to give a shout out to. It's not so much a product, but and this is a company that Highline Beta invested in. Put that the bias at the very beginning of it, but it's Requity Homes. So
Hmm.
Requity Homes, speaking about housing, it's a rent to own platform. Solo founder, Amy Ding, great founder. She's been at it for a while. Went through the Highline Beta Venture Studio. But why I'm shouting it out is because I think she's actually trying to solve a problem around home affordability, which is huge, and she's solving it for segments of the market that are always underserved. So, for example, newcomers to Canada.
Right.
You,
Hmm.
not that we're only focused on Canadian specific problems, but Canada needs millions of people to come to the country to help grow the country's economy and make it sustainable, in part
Hmm.
because nobody's having kids. Fantastic. I'm all for more people coming to the country. Where are they going to
Hmm.
live? How are they going to
Hmm.
afford it?
Yeah.
And so Requity Homes has a rent-to-own platform. She buys the home through Requity Homes. You rent it from her, and you buy it back at an agreed-upon price in call it 3 years. And if she can scale that business, she's going to help more people achieve their dream of buying a home, but also help them get into the country more successfully. So again, very purpose driven. It's less a technology business. There is technology behind it, but it's not how you would think of maybe a product.
Mm.
But I think what she's doing matters and is important. Very difficult to scale, of course. You require lots of capital for it. You have to sell people on the idea of this as a way of getting into a home. But it also works. I've seen it work. So shout out to Amy and shout out to Requity Homes for what they're doing.
Awesome. That's a great shout out because I'm also worried about my kids and their future here being able to afford homes.
Yeah, I have no idea how anybody will afford anything. So yeah, I have no clue. But these are big, big, big problems. Now you can't just go and solve these gigantic problems. This is the other thing I think for founders. You have to dig really deep to find a smaller, narrower problem that you have a meaningful insight into. It's
Yeah.
why we haven't invested in an age tech or elder care business yet, because we just haven't found that thing. But we're
Hmm.
still looking. We're still looking. I'd like to build and fund a company in the elder care space in 2024.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, these are gigantic, enormous societal problems. Again, don't boil the ocean. Try to whittle down and find something specific, a wedge that you could build into, start solving from there, and scale.
Perfect. Perfect. So, with that, I would like to thank you, Ben, for joining our podcast. This was entertaining, and also I learned a lot here about you, about the book, more than I even know before. It's always fun to see the background about things. And also about Highland Beta and what is Adventure Studio. And you enforced a lot of things I already knew about product management and how to build them. But I love the stories behind it as well. So thank you very much, Ben, for joining Beyond Product.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And take care, everyone. See you next time.